Hello, everybody. It's your Bali bad boy, Dave Neal here, stand up comic host of Bachelor Nation News. That's right, this is a video live from Indonesia where I'm 16 hours ahead. So you're getting this on a Thursday morning and it's late Thursday night here. We made it, we survived, no complaints, long flights, lots of love, lots of amazing food on the journey, and happy to be here. All right. Well, we've got Madi Prewett. This was sent to me by several people. Said she stands firm in her faith that it has cost her. She said thousands, maybe millions of people have persecuted her, which is leading a lot of people to ask, what do you define as persecution? And some are even asking, is it fetishizing suffering? Now, you guys know me, not anti-Christian, not anti any of that, but, of course, we do have a couple questions to ask here regarding, is she delusional? And are people actually out to get her, or is it just a weird feeling to think that it's you versus the world, right? Well, we're gonna get into this right now. Hit me up with a follow on Instagram if you want behind the scenes bonus content. I'm going to be doing a Patreon tomorrow where I show the tour of the new digs that we have. We are in the jungle. If you can't hear, it's downpouring outside. Just amazing beauty over here in the beautiful island of Bali. And we made this video a few days ago. Maddie and Grant signing her purity contract. Look, we're not here to tell people to do with their body what isn't up to them, which is why, in some part, I think Maddie's getting a lot of hate from people online because they feel like she's sort of, preaching, literally, it's what she's doing, what other people should be doing with their bodies, saying, oh, I don't mean to shame others. I just think if you, I don't know, have sex before getting married, before signing some arbitrary contract, you're doomed, or your body's going to be used or whatever. It's like, okay, well, let's not just, we're here to just dispel a lot of toxic beliefs. We're not here to talk trash about people's religions or cultures. We're just here to provide a little bit of a counterweight when we feel like sometimes they've kind of gone off the deep end. Here's what Maddie, and I'm not saying she went off the deep end, but here's what she said in a recent podcast regarding how she feels like thousands and if not millions of people are persecuting her.
To be honest, like I've had those moments where standing firm in my faith has cost me a lot. And by a lot, I mean thousands, maybe even millions of people that have persecuted me, and I've said really mean and hateful things. And there's been moments in my life where it would have been easy for me to change myself or to start giving in and believing what they're saying about me. It talks about in Matthew, like how blessed we are. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. And I just thought that was so good, of like, rejoice in being misunderstood. Like, rejoice in being insulted. Like, rejoice in being an outcast. Rejoice in being set apart for Christ. Rejoice in standing firm in your faith. Even if people don't understand, even if people persecute, because great is your reward in heaven. And that's what you and I are living for.
All right. Okay. Well, there it is, folks. You heard it. She did the whole gnarly. That's what you and I are living for. Unfortunately, I think if we could get down to the root of why I think Maddie does get a lot of hate online, it's that she jockeys herself to be in a righteous position so that if somebody disagrees with her, they're not pursuing a life full of love. And that's kind of where we're going to discuss this fetishizing of persecution culture in the evangelical world. Now, I was going to break this down for you and just kind of spitball and ramble, but it's actually already written out very well by an evangelical leader. So that what I'm going to read for you guys, the evangelical persecution complex, is don't get triggered if you're Christian and you feel like I've got it out to get you. It shows why a lot of the grifting that exists in different religions, namely in this case the Christian, the evangelical, the grifting that exists, which is the sort of like hot topic, talk about purity culture, talk about this, it sells books, it gets people elected into different political leadership roles. the theological and cultural roots of a damaging attitude in the Christian community. So this guy, Alan Noble, is actually going to prosecute his point that persecution complex actually hurts Christianity, and because, you don't exactly have much to complain about. And it's like, hey, no offense to Madi Prewett out there, you married a billionaire's son. You're set for the rest of your life. You don't have much to complain about. And it doesn't mean she hasn't had a lot of hate thrown her way. But, whenever people say, oh, I get death threats all the time. If it's some stranger on Reddit telling you to kill yourself, I'm sorry. It's not what used to be, where people would have stalkers that follow them. There's actual people with those types of issues. I'm saying, I'm not negating Maddie's struggle. But when she says thousands, if not millions of people are persecuting her, someone in the comment section there said, persecuted by millions? How would you define persecution? Now, of course, we have a dictionary. It's hostility and ill treatment, especially on the basis of ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation, or political belief. So clearly her persecution that she believes she's facing is due to the fact that she is an advocate for purity culture. And maybe she doesn't use those words, but she's an advocate for people waiting till marriage because she did that. And what I'm an advocate for is that everyone uses their critical thinking skills to treat their situation with the love and independence that it deserves, which means maybe you have the personality type that can't handle having sex before marriage. Maybe you can have plenty of sex before marriage. Maybe you could never do an abortion. Maybe there's a circumstance where you would have to make the difficult decision to have one. I live in that world where we don't just clump everyone into, no, you must all wait till you sign the papers that say you're married. What does that even mean, Maddie? So I reject the idea that she's being persecuted, and I think it's more that people are just pushing back on what they see as a very elitist culture. Persecution has an allure for many evangelicals. In the Bible, Christians are promised by St. Paul that they will suffer for Christ if they love him. But especially in contemporary America, it is not clear what shape that suffering will take. Narratives of political, cultural, and theological oppression are popular in evangelical communities. But these are sometimes fiction or deeply exaggerated nonfiction and only rarely accurate. This is problematic. If evangelicals want to have a persuasive voice in a pluralist society, a voice that can defend Christians from serious persecution, then we must be able to discern accurately when we are truly victims of oppression and when this victimization is only imagined. It appears to me in some ways like Maddie has sort of imagined a persecution. There are some understandable reasons for this exaggerated sense of persecution. Globally, Christians face incredible discrimination. In North Korea and many Muslim-governed countries, Christians risk imprisonment and death for their faith. The Christian community in Mosul, Iraq, was exiled, and many Christians are still persecuted by the ISIS jihadist group. And by the way, I want to let you guys know, this article was written in 2014. So this article makes some pretty wild predictions about what's to come, and 9 short years later, they pretty much hit the nail on the head. In the U.S., evangelical values have often been in tension with public policy and cultural mores, especially in the last several years. This includes recent debates over contraceptive coverage, abortion rights, and the rise of same-sex marriage. Some Christians anticipate major restrictions to religious liberty in the future as a result of these tensions, a concern that is not unfounded. But in anticipating such restrictions, it is easy to imagine wrongly that they're already here. And of course, one of the restrictions that is now here is the taking back of Roe v. Wade. Evangelical subculture plays a huge role in this perception. The Jesus freak movement in the mid-1990s, essentially, it made it cool, paradoxically cool, to be a supporter of Jesus. And I mean, is it cool? Is it not cool? I think it's a personal decision, right? But the emphasis, perhaps unintentionally, was on being a freak rather than following Christ and accepting the consequences. So, yeah, it was this idea in the 1990s, this Jesus freak movement, that kind of led to the popularity to kind of take a strong stance, which, again, if you believe in something, you should take a stance on it. The Christian church itself has a long history of telling stories of martyrdom and persecution. The stories of saints' lives often center on their sufferings for Christ. For example, Fox's Book of Martyrs is a popular and classic text recounting notable martyrdom throughout church history. The purpose of these stories is to inspire and strengthen Christians, particularly those who will later face persecution. But they were not designed to function as aspirational fantasy. And that is the real problem with many persecution narratives in Christian culture. They fetishize suffering. And why would you fetishize suffering? Like, why would you do that? The narratives appeal to broader audiences. Several major conservative political pundits and organizations have made a name for themselves by selectively highlighting cases of alleged persecution of Christians. If it bleeds, it leads. If you think you're being persecuted, it's going to print a story. It's us versus them. It's as old school as it gets in the genetics and the DNA of our blood. The most well-known example is the so-called War on Christmas, which is predicated on the claim that the holiday has been secularized by retailers' marketing choices. Fox News has a reputation for running these sensationalized stories of suspected or alleged discrimination. Oh, they're taking Christ out of Christmas. Look, they've been saying this for 20 years, right? A number of other news organizations and Christian groups are also guilty of this. So there's stories of basically sensationalizing issues and jockeying to play the victim, where you might have a noble complaint about a religion, and then all of a sudden then they're saying they're persecuted. Kind of is what's going on in some ways with Madi, where she's got a large following on social media, and a lot of people don't buy into the bullshit of purity culture, so they're probably fighting back and saying this is damaging to women. And then Madi responds and goes, I'm being persecuted. No, you're not, Nimwit. You're not being persecuted. You're having your ideas be questioned by a greater amount of people. All of these cultural factors are framed in a deep theological conception of persecution. Traditionally, Christians have had a very broad view of what it means to suffer for Christ, broad enough to include everything from genuine martyrdom to mild ridicule by non-believers. And I would say, Madi, for the most part, is just receiving mild ridicule. And it's not even necessary from non-believers. It's from people that don't believe you should tell young teen or preteen girls what to do with their bodies. Behind this is an essential part of the faith, which says that every Christian will be persecuted by the world. True believers will lose jobs, face exile, and suffer from violence. The problem is that for most of U.S. history, Christians haven't been persecuted, at least not in comparison to early believers or even what Christians in places like Iraq face today. The question for American Christians is what to make of the Bible's warnings that we will be persecuted. For many evangelicals, the lack of very public and dramatic persecution could be interpreted as a sign that they just aren't faithful enough. If they were persecuted, they could be confident they are saved. This creates an incentive to interpret personal experiences and news events as signs of oppression, which are ostensibly validations of our commitment to Christ. The danger of this view is that believers can come to see victimhood as an essential part of their identity. Is Madi seeing victimhood as an essential part of her identity? They're out there to get us. Thousands, if not millions of people are persecuting me. No, they're not. Other Christians would argue that these biblical warnings are not intended to mean that victimhood is a sign of salvation. Instead, they are meant to assure believers that suffering in life is not a sign that God has abandoned the faithful or that the gospel is not the truth. This is a radical thing about Christ, and coincidentally, the reason why Nietzsche called Christianity a slave morality. Christ's suffering on the cross is an inversion of worldly conceptions of success and power. His model is of sacrifice and selfishness. Persecution is a constituent part of his divinity, not a sign that he was defeated. That's not to say there aren't really very real incidents of discrimination and even hatred towards Christianity in the U.S. But as members of the largest faith group in America, Christians are relatively well protected and more often accommodated than actively harmed. And I know when I make content about this, I try to be as accommodating as possible. No, this isn't about you. It's about one harmful idea. And this has implications for those outside of evangelicalism as well. Excuse me, I'm trying to read this, but I have not slept in 2 days. It's a challenge of tolerance. Just because some claims of persecution are contrived doesn't mean actual persecution doesn't exist here and elsewhere. So essentially, it's the boy who cried wolf. So, the actual people that are getting persecuted, we're not going to hear from, because people that are like Instagram famous, making a living off of, preaching in some cases, I'd say Bible verses they don't even know what mean. It's like there's actual fish to be fried out there. Tensions between Christians and non-Christians are likely to grow in the coming years as cultural mores shift. And again, this was written in 2014, so boy, did they hit the nail on the head. And out of this tension will come negotiations, dialogue, lawsuit, ignorance, and conflict. For evangelicals, preparation for this must begin in our own house as we learn to better discern good theologies of suffering, edifying stories of persecution, and distorted reports of discrimination. So it's an interesting question. If you're ever jockeying to play the victim, why? Why does it do you good to play the victim? You might be a victim, but are you playing the victim? In this case, it kind of feels like Maddie's beating her chest and saying, I've been persecuted for the truths that I'm telling. And my response to that is, I don't think that's true. I think you're getting subtle feedback from people who think you're operating from a place of moral superiority where you tell others what to do with their bodies. That's what I think. Let me know what you guys do. More content coming your way. We'll be back after this.